So thank you, and thank you all for getting up so early to listen to this. And of course, Martin Gardner, in addition to writing about mathematics and magic, was also a big champion of science against pseudoscience and irrationality. And this sort of falls into that aspect of his work. And let's see, just to set this up a little bit, the genesis of this talk, pardon the expression, was when I moved to Kansas in 2000. I just finished graduate school. It was my first job, and I was working at Kansas State University. And some of you might remember what was going on in Kansas educationally at that time. A conservative school board was voted in, and they did what conservative school boards do. They promptly voted out, they promptly eliminated evolution and the Big Bang and other things of that nature from the science standards. And this kind of played into the work that I was doing. So I got kind of interested in creationism and intelligent design, and I noticed some interesting aspects of their argumentation. I was a little surprised when I went to their conferences and socialized with them, just how often I had mathematical arguments thrown at me, and especially arguments based on probability. So it got me thinking, right, because probability theory has a lot of legitimate uses, in evolutionary biology, and it kind of became kind of a fascinating subject to me, so I'll just say a few quick words about it. So first of all, remember, evolution is, was roughly based on the idea of small genetic changes accumulating over time. But of course, when Darwin formulated this idea, they didn't know about genes, right? I mean, when you said traits were heritable, that was just an empirical observation. I mean, you just observed that traits of adults were reflected in the children, and so like the earliest attempts to test evolutionary biology were actually statistical in nature. And here's a quote from William Weldon, a fairly prominent biologist at the time. It says, "The questions raised by the Darwinian hypothesis are purely statistical, and this statistical method is the only one at present obvious by which that hypothesis can be experimentally checked." And he literally meant, he was a big expert in crabs, for example, and he literally meant, accumulating huge numbers of crabs and measuring physical characteristics of them, then comparing those down through the generations. It was really painstaking work, but that was really all they could do at the time. But actually, there was tremendous progress in statistics came out of this research tradition. With the rediscovery of Mendel's work around the turn from the 19th to the 20th century, suddenly a new sort of mathematics came into it, right? Once you understand about particulate inheritance, genes, then you realize that combinatorics is the correct branch of mathematics, combinatorics and discrete probability, and this led to the development of theoretical population genetics, especially Ronald Fisher's book, The Genetical Theory of Natural Selection, and this work became foundational to providing a theoretical foundation for evolution. Probability theory continues to find new uses. Motu Kimura, the great Japanese geneticist, introduced information theory, an offshoot of probability, into the work in the 1960s. Modern population genetics is focusing on something called coalescent theory, which is about trying to find the most likely tree to explain so-called genetic polymorphisms. And if you want to get really fancy, Markov models on trees are a big area of research, and they find applications as well. Okay, so that's kind of the use part. Okay, let's switch to the abuse part. For as long as there have been evolutionists, there have been anti-evolutionists. And here's a quote that I absolutely love. This comes from the Reverend William A. Williams in a book that's freely available online if anyone wants to check it out. And he writes, "Every theory to which mathematics can be applied will be proved or disproved by this acid test. Figures will not lie, and mathematics will not lie, even at the demand of liars. The evolution theory, especially as applied to man, likewise is disproved by mathematics. The proof is overwhelming and decisive. Thus, God makes the noble science of mathematics bear testimony in favor of the true theories and against the false theories." And much as I love the idea of God elevating mathematics to this status, I think most scientifically knowledgeable readers will not agree that the proof was overwhelming and decisive. Here's now probabilistic arguments come up in a lot of forms. I'll just mention one very simple one. This is actually from the Saturday Evening Post, which is a mainstream publication, a conservative-leaning publication, but not like the National Review or something like that. And I just love this quote because, first of all, how often do you see a multinomial coefficient, in a mainstream magazine? And basically, I won't read the whole quote, but basically what the fellow is doing here is he's saying, take a very complex molecule like hemoglobin, and you treat it as a purely combinatorial object, just as a sequence of amino acids, and then you do some very crude calculations. You say, oh, it's hundreds of amino acids long, so it's like 20 to the 400 different sequences that you can have. So the probability of finding any one is 1 over that. And here's the argument. And then they say that probability is so small that it just can't have arisen naturally. Now, of course, there are a lot of problems with this that I think will come kind of instinctively if you have some mathematical training, which is that so-called genotype space, the space of all possible genotypes, has a mathematical structure. It has a metric structure on it. Some genomes are closer to each other mutationally than others, and it has a probabilistic structure. Obviously, that argument I just mentioned assumes that you have a uniform distribution, which is, of course, ridiculous. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that a mathematician would know kind of instinctively. But you can imagine, if you're some creationist propagandist and you drop one of these arguments into the conversation, it can look very impressive. And in the years that I spent, going to creationist conferences, I often had people, usually not knowing that I was a mathematician, throw probabilistic arguments at me, and also arguments more superficially sophisticated than this. Okay, so anyway, that's the very quick overview of the use and abuse of probability theory. Of course, there's a lot more to say, and in fairness to the creationist and intelligent design folks, they make some arguments that are at least superficially more sophisticated than that. So if any of this is remotely interesting, and I apologize for the self-promotion, but I did just write a book about this, so if anyone wants to discuss this further, this book will be available from Cambridge University Press, should be by the end of the month. And that's it for me, so thank you very much.